Red lights spin across the ceiling of the command room as Elena Voss sprints through the doors, her badge still swinging from her neck. Every screen in the building shows the same frozen image, a massive shape hanging silent above the orbit of the moon, throwing a shadow that should not exist in open space. "It arrived 4 minutes ago," says Daniel Cole, not looking up from his terminal. His hands move fast over the keyboard, but his voice stays flat, the way people sound when panic has already used up all their energy. No engine trail, no warning. It was just there. Elena drops into the chair beside him and pulls the live feed toward her. The object is enormous, larger than any station humans have built, larger than anything humans have ever launched into the dark. Its surface catches starlight in a way that makes it look less like metal and more like something grown, smooth curves without a single visible seam. "Is it transmitting?" she asks. Daniel turns the volume up before she finishes the question. A voice fills the room, calm, layered, speaking in perfect English, then perfect Mandarin, then perfect Spanish, cycling through language after language without pause or accent, as if the speaker has always known every tongue on Earth. "We have observed your world for a long time. Your species has proven unable to govern itself without conflict. Effective immediately, all nations of Earth are ordered to surrender authority to the Virith Dominion. You have 72 hours to comply. Resistance will not be tolerated." The room goes still. Someone near the back drops a folder, and the sound of it hitting the floor feels louder than it should. "That's not a probe," Daniel mutters. "That's a warship." Elena doesn't answer right away. She is staring at the numbers scrolling beneath the video feed: distance, mass estimate, radiation signature, and none of it makes sense against anything she has studied. Every model she has ever built for what a first contact might look like assumed curiosity, or silence, or fear. Nobody built a model for an ultimatum delivered like a phone call from an unpaid bill collector. Within the hour, the message has reached every screen on the planet. Elena watches it happen from a hallway monitor, the same voice playing in a dozen studios, a dozen different anchors trying to explain something none of them understand. Streets outside the research building are already filling with people staring up at the sky, though the ship is far too distant to be seen without a telescope. It doesn't matter. Everyone wants to look anyway. Her phone buzzes. It's her sister, Grace, calling from 3 states away. "Elena, is this real? Please tell me this isn't some kind of test broadcast." "It's real," Elena says, keeping her voice steady for her sister's sake, though her own hands are shaking. "I have to go. I'll call you later." "Elena." She hangs up before Grace can ask the question. Neither of them wants spoken out loud, whether later is a promise anyone can actually keep right now. Back in the command room, General Peter Holt has arrived, flanked by 2 aides, who look barely older than graduate students. He is a broad man with a calm face that has clearly been trained not to show fear in front of subordinates, though his eyes betray him for a second when he looks at the frozen image of the ship on the main display. "Talk to me," he says. "What do we actually know?" Daniel pulls up the transmission data. The message repeats every 11 minutes, no variation. Whoever sent it wants there to be no ambiguity. 72 hours, full compliance. Or, they say resistance won't be tolerated. "Do we know what resistance would even look like to them?" Holt asks. Nobody answers, because nobody knows. Every military asset built by every nation on Earth suddenly feels smaller than a child's toy, compared to the shape sitting silently above the moon. Elena raises her hand slightly, an old habit from lecture halls that feels strange in a room full of soldiers. There's something else. Buried under the audio message, there's a secondary data stream. It's not part of the spoken warning, it's separate. Holt turns to her. "Separate how?" "It's a sequence of numbers," she says, pulling it onto the main screen. Rows of digits scroll past. Precise, deliberate, clearly not random noise. I don't think this was meant to be found by ordinary listening equipment. It's embedded far below the main broadcast, almost like a whisper underneath a shout. "Could it be a targeting system?" one of the aides asks, voice tight. "Something they use to lock onto cities?" "I don't think so," Elena says. "The pattern doesn't behave like targeting data. It behaves like it wants to be understood, not used against us." Holt studies her for a long moment, the kind of look commanding officers give when they're deciding whether a stranger's opinion is worth the risk of trusting it. You have 3 hours before the full council convenes. Find out what those numbers mean. Elena nods, already pulling up analysis software as he walks away. Daniel leans over, keeping his voice low so the others in the room won't overhear. You really think that's not a threat? I think, Elena says, eyes fixed on the scrolling digits, that whoever sent this wanted 2 different messages to reach us. One is loud enough for the entire world to hear. The other is quiet enough that only someone looking for it would ever find it. Outside, the sun begins to set over a city that suddenly feels smaller than it has ever felt before, and far above, the ship continues to hang in silence, waiting for an answer it has already promised to punish if it doesn't like what it hears. By midnight, Elena has not left her desk. Coffee has gone cold beside her twice, and the noise of the command room has settled into the low hum of exhausted people trying to hold themselves together. She has isolated the second data stream from the main broadcast, stripped away every layer of noise, and laid the sequence out in a way that finally makes sense to her trained eye. It isn't a threat. It isn't a weapon system. It's coordinates, structured with a mathematical elegance that feels almost like a signature, a set of numbers meant to describe a location, using constants that any sufficiently advanced civilization would recognize, regardless of language or culture. The kind of numbers built from things like the ratio of a circle's circumference to its diameter, expressed in a way that transcends spoken words entirely. Daniel, she says, voice hoarse from disuse, come look at this. He wheels his chair over, eyes tired but sharp. What am I looking at? A location, Elena says. Not on Earth, somewhere else. I think this is meant to be a response point, a place where they expect a reply to go, separate from any radio transmission we might send back. Daniel frowns at the numbers, running them through a secondary model to confirm what Elena is seeing. If you're right, this changes everything. It means the ultimatum might not actually be the whole message. That's what I think too, Elena says. The demand for surrender is the part built for panic. It's loud, it's simple, and it's meant to be understood instantly by every person on the planet. But this, she taps the coordinate sequence. This feels like it's meant for whoever is paying close enough attention to look past the fear. Before Daniel can respond, the doors swing open again, and General Holt strides in, flanked now by 3 additional officials Elena doesn't recognize, official badges from agencies she has only ever seen mentioned in briefing documents. Behind them walks a woman, with sharp eyes and silver hair pulled back tightly, introduced simply as Director Laura Finch, someone whose name alone makes half the room straighten in their seats. Report, Holt says, arms crossed. Elena stands, forcing her voice not to shake. Sir, I believe the hidden data stream contains a set of coordinates, not a targeting system, and not part of the surrender demand. I think it's an invitation, or possibly a test, separate from the ultimatum broadcast to the public. Finch steps forward, studying the numbers on the screen with an unreadable expression. An invitation to what, exactly? I don't know yet, Elena admits, but the structure suggests they expect a response, something more specific than silence or panic. Something that shows intention. And if we send the wrong kind of response, Finch asks quietly. Nobody in the room has an answer for that, and for a moment, the only sound is the quiet hum of servers processing numbers that might decide the fate of the entire species. Elena feels the weight of every eye in the room settle on her, and she understands, with sudden and total clarity, that whatever recommendation she makes next will not stay contained to this room. It will ripple outward to every government on the planet, every person now staring up at a sky that has never felt more crowded, more threatening, or more uncertain than it does tonight. 71 hours remain before the deadline expires, and somewhere above the moon, the ship continues to wait, patient and silent, for humanity to decide what kind of species it truly is. Finch dismisses most of the room with a single motion of her hand, keeping only Holt, Elena, and Daniel behind. The doors close, and the sudden quiet feels heavier than the noise that came before it. You understand what you're suggesting, Finch says, turning to Elena. You want us to treat a threat of conquest as some kind of open door. I'm not suggesting we ignore the threat, Elena answers carefully. I'm saying there may be 2 audiences for this message, one built for fear, and one built for whoever refuses to only react in fear. If she's wrong, and we treat this as an invitation instead of a genuine warning, We could lose whatever narrow chance we have to negotiate at all. And if she's right, Finch says, and we waste 71 hours arguing about troop movements, instead of finding out what those coordinates actually lead to, we might lose something we can never get back. Elena watches the two of them weigh a decision far above her usual authority, and she feels, for the first time since the ship appeared, a strange and unwelcome sense of responsibility settle onto her shoulders. She did not ask to be the person holding the thread that might unravel this crisis, yet here she is, and there is no one else in the room better positioned to keep pulling it. "Give me access to the full spectrum data," she says. "If there's more hidden inside that transmission, I want to find it before the council meets." Finch studies her for a long moment, then nods once, sharp and final. "You have 2 hours. Make them count." As the door closes behind the officials, Daniel leans back in his chair, exhaling like a man who has been holding his breath since the ship first appeared. 2 hours to figure out whether we just found humanity's only lifeline, or its final warning. Elena doesn't answer. She simply turns back to the numbers still glowing on the screen, and begins to work. The 2 hours pass faster than anyone expects. Elena barely notices the clock, absorbed entirely in the layers of the transmission, peeling them apart one by one, cross-referencing the buried coordinates against every known model of stellar mapping. Daniel works beside her without complaint, running verification after verification, his exhaustion pushed aside by the same fierce focus that has taken hold of Elena. By the time Finch returns, flanked once more by Holt and a group of officials Elena hasn't met before, the two of them have built something close to a full picture. "Talk," Finch says, standing at the head of the table now set up in the center of the command room, a small model of the situation projected above it in shifting blue light. Elena stands, forcing her voice to stay level despite the growing crowd of unfamiliar faces watching her. The hidden data stream isn't random, and it isn't a targeting system. It's built using mathematical constants, values that remain the same, no matter what language or culture interprets them. That's not something you do if you want to threaten a location. It's something you do if you want to be certain the message can be understood by absolutely anyone, capable of basic mathematics. "So, it's a location," says a stern man near the far end of the table, introduced only as Ambassador Owen Price. "A location for what?" "We believe it's meant to function as a reply point," Daniel says, taking over as Elena catches her breath. "A destination separate from the main ultimatum, meant to receive a response, not deliver one." "You're suggesting we send something back," Price says, voice edged with disbelief, "to the same species that just threatened to conquer our planet." "I'm suggesting," Elena says, stepping back in, "that the loud message and the quiet message might not come from the same intention. The ultimatum is designed to force an immediate emotional reaction, fear, panic, submission. But the coordinates are designed with patience, precision, and an assumption that whoever finds them will take time to understand them properly. Those two things don't usually come from the same kind of mind." Holt leans forward, elbows on the table. "Or it's a trap. Something designed to see if we're clever enough to find, so they know exactly how advanced we are before deciding how hard we'll be to conquer." The room falls into a heavy silence, each person turning the thought over in their mind. Elena feels her stomach tighten, because she cannot fully dismiss the possibility either. She has no proof this is anything other than exactly what it could sound like from the outside, reckless hope dressed up as scientific reasoning. Finch finally speaks, her voice carrying the weight of someone who has made countless difficult decisions before this one, though clearly none quite like it. "We have 68 hours left. Every simulation our military has run says an armed confrontation with a vessel of that size and unknown technology ends in catastrophic loss, with no guarantee of even slowing them down. Every diplomatic model we have assumes some kind of two-way communication is necessary before any negotiation can even begin." She turns to Elena. "If we send something to those coordinates, what exactly would we be sending?" Elena hesitates only a moment before answering. "Not surrender. Not a threat. I think we send exactly what they sent us. Coordinates of our own, expressed the same way, using constants they'll recognize instantly. It shows we understood their message, that we're capable of precise thought rather than blind panic, and that we're choosing to respond deliberately instead of complying out of fear or attacking out of desperation." "A third option," Finch says slowly, testing the words. A third option, Elena confirms. Price shakes his head, exasperated. You want to answer a threat of conquest with a math problem. I want to answer it with proof, Elena says, meeting his eyes without flinching. Proof that we're a species capable of something other than fear or violence. If this truly is some kind of test, and I believe it might be, then complying without question could look exactly like the behavior of a civilization too fractured to trust with anything. And responding with aggression could look exactly like the behavior of a civilization too dangerous to leave unchecked. The room stays quiet for a long moment. Holt studies the projection above the table, the slowly rotating model of the alien vessel, massive and unreadable. And if you're wrong, if sending those coordinates does nothing but hand them exactly what they need to strike back harder, then we've lost 68 hours we were never going to win back through force anyway, Elena says quietly. I don't say that to be dramatic, sir. I say it because it's true. Nothing in any simulation your teams have run gives us a path to victory through combat. This might be the only option that gives us a path to anything at all. Finch straightens, glancing around the table at the officials still weighing the decision in silence. I want every available analyst cross-checking this theory within the hour. If there's even a possibility this could work, I want to know before we commit to anything. But I also want contingency plans ready, in case this goes exactly the way General Holt fears it might. The meeting stretches on for hours after that, arguments rising and falling, models built and rebuilt, world leaders from other nations joining through secure video links, each bringing their own fears, their own theories, their own demands. Elena stays through all of it, answering question after question, defending her reasoning against skepticism that sometimes borders on hostility. By the time a decision is finally reached, the sun has risen again outside the building, though inside the windowless command room, no one has noticed the passing of another day. The final call comes just before midday, delivered not by any single leader, but by a fragile, hard-won consensus among the nations still able to communicate quickly enough to matter. They will not surrender. They will not attack. They will answer the silent, hidden portion of the message with a message of their own, coordinates built from the same universal constants, transmitted exactly as precisely and deliberately as the ones received. Elena is the one chosen to prepare the final transmission, alongside Daniel and a small team of engineers pulled from 3 different countries, working together, in a room that suddenly feels far too small for the size of the decision being made inside it. She types the sequence herself, checking it 3 times before allowing it to be finalized, aware that a single misplaced digit could turn an act of careful diplomacy into something that reads as confusion, or worse, as a mistake unworthy of trust. Ready? Daniel asks, hand hovering near the transmission control. Elena looks at the numbers one final time, thinking of Grace, of the crowded streets outside, filled with people who have no idea this quiet negotiation is even happening, of the ship still hanging silently above the moon, patient and unreadable. Send it, she says. Daniel presses the control, and somewhere in the room, a soft tone confirms the transmission has left Earth, carrying with it not a surrender, and not a threat, but a single careful answer, aimed directly at the coordinates hidden beneath a warning, meant to frighten an entire planet into submission. For a long moment, nobody in the room speaks. The signal is already gone, racing outward at the speed of light, and there is nothing left to do now but wait to see whether it reaches something willing to listen, or nothing at all. Outside, the world continues to hold its breath, unaware that the quietest decision of the entire crisis has just been made, and that whatever happens next will depend entirely on how it is received by something none of them fully understand. Nothing happens. Not in the first hour, not in the first day, not even as the ultimatum broadcast continues to repeat every 11 minutes with the same flat, unwavering demand for surrender. Elena watches the counter on the wall tick past 24 hours since the coordinates were sent, then 36, then 48, and with every passing hour, the silence grows heavier, until it feels less like an absence of response, and more like a presence all its own, pressing down on everyone still awake enough to notice it. Outside the research building, the world has stopped pretending to function normally. Grace calls again on the second day, her voice tight with barely restrained panic. People are leaving the city, she says. Stores are empty. I saw two men fighting over the last case of water at the store near my apartment. Elena, what is actually happening? The news keeps saying negotiations are ongoing, but nobody will say with who, or about what. Elena presses her fingers against her closed eyes, exhaustion pulling at every part of her. I can't tell you everything, Grace, but we're trying something. Something that isn't surrender and isn't a fight. Just, please, stay inside as much as you can. Keep your doors locked. I'll call when I know more. You promised that yesterday, Grace says quietly, and the line goes silent for a moment before she adds, just be careful. Whatever you're doing there, be careful. The call ends, and Elena sits alone in the hallway for a long moment, feeling the full weight of a promise she isn't sure she can keep. Around her, the building hums with restrained tension, officials moving quickly between rooms, voices kept low, faces pale from lack of sleep. On the large screen in the command room, footage from cities across the globe cycles endlessly, streets crowded with people, trying to leave places that have nowhere safer to go. Military vehicles stationed outside government buildings not to fight an alien threat, but to hold back a population, edging closer to chaos, with every hour that passes without an answer. By the third day, financial markets have effectively stopped functioning. Numbers on trading screens blur together in a downward spiral nobody bothers trying to track anymore, because the concept of long-term value has lost meaning to people who aren't certain there will be a long-term at all. Elena catches glimpses of it on hallway monitors as she moves between labs, headlines scrolling past about empty shelves, canceled flights, and entire neighborhoods forming makeshift patrols out of fear rather than any official order. Inside the command room, General Holt has grown quieter, his earlier certainty replaced by something closer to grim patience. He watches the silent ship on the main display for long stretches without speaking, arms crossed, jaw tight. 3 days, he says finally, breaking a silence that had stretched for nearly an hour. 3 days of nothing, while entire cities start eating themselves alive out of fear. If this doesn't work, Dr. Voss, I hope you understand exactly what we've traded for it. I understand, Elena says, and she does, more fully now than she did when she first proposed the idea. Every hour of silence feels like a small, private accusation, a reminder that she convinced an already frightened world to gamble everything on a theory built from nothing but careful guesswork and desperate hope. Daniel, working beside her without pause, finally breaks the tension building in the room. Elena, come look at this. She crosses to his terminal, where he has spent the better part of 2 days running deeper analysis on the original coordinate sequence, searching for anything they might have missed the first time. What is it? I think I found the deeper pattern, he says, pulling up a visual representation of the numbers, layered now with annotations he has built over the long hours of waiting. The sequence isn't just coordinates. Look at the ratio between the primary values and the secondary values threaded underneath them. Elena studies the pattern closely, and slowly, the shape of it becomes clear to her. It's not just pointing somewhere, it's proving something. The relationship between these numbers only holds true if you understand a constant that describes the relationship between a circle's edge and its center, expressed in a form that would be recognized by any species capable of geometry, regardless of how they write their numbers or speak their language. Exactly, Daniel says, leaning back, exhaustion and excitement mixing plainly across his face. It's not a location built to be found by accident. It's a location built to be found only by someone capable of recognizing shared mathematical truth. Which means whoever built this wasn't testing our courage or our military strength. They were testing whether we could think the way they think. Elena feels something shift inside her chest, a fragile thread of hope pulling taut after days of doubt. And we answered with the same structure, the same proof of shared understanding. If that's true, Daniel says carefully, then the silence might not mean rejection. It might mean they're still processing what we sent, deciding what it means that we found the pattern at all. Before Elena can respond, the doors swing open, and Finch enters, moving with the brisk urgency of someone carrying news too important to delay. Dr. Voss, General Holt, you need to see this immediately. They follow her to the central display, where a group of analysts has gathered, tension radiating from every one of them. On the screen, a new set of readings scrolls past, radiation signatures, energy fluctuations, movement data from the alien vessel that has remained utterly still for days. The ship's engines are active, one of the analysts says, voice tight. Power output has increased nearly 40% over the last hour. Holt straightens immediately, all trace of grim patience replaced by sharp focus. Are they preparing to attack? We don't know, the analyst admits. The pattern doesn't match any offensive posture we've modeled. It's more consistent with, well, with the ship preparing to move somewhere, or preparing to broadcast something larger than the original message. Elena's heart pounds as she watches the numbers shift on the screen, every second stretching unbearably long. Around her, the room holds its collective breath, soldiers and scientists and officials, all staring at the same uncertain data, none of them able to say with confidence whether the next moment will bring salvation or catastrophe. Then, without warning, the repeating ultimatum broadcast that is played every 11 minutes for 3 straight days simply stops. The silence that follows feels different from before, heavier somehow, charged with an anticipation that makes the hair on Elena's arms stand up. Nobody in the room dares to speak, as if breaking the quiet might somehow disrupt whatever is happening high above the moon. Confirm that, Finch says, voice low and controlled despite the tension radiating from her. Confirm the ultimatum broadcast has ceased. Confirmed, the analyst says, hands trembling slightly over the keyboard. No transmission for the last 6 minutes. That's the longest gap since the ship first appeared. Holt turns to Elena, something unreadable crossing his face. Not quite hope, not quite fear, but something caught tensely between the two. What does this mean, Dr. Voss? Elena stares at the still image of the ship on the main display, its smooth, seamless surface catching starlight the same way it has since the moment it arrived, patient and unreadable as ever. I don't know, she admits quietly, but I don't think it's a coincidence that this happened after they finished processing what we sent them. For the next several hours, the entire command room exists in a state of suspended tension, every person watching the silent ship with an intensity that makes the air itself feel thick and difficult to breathe. Reports flood in from monitoring stations around the world, all confirming the same thing. The ultimatum broadcast has stopped entirely, replaced by nothing but the steady, unreadable hum of a vessel that continues to hold its position above the moon. Grace calls again during the 5th hour of silence, her voice quieter than before, almost hesitant. The broadcast stopped, she says. Every channel is talking about it. Does that mean it's over? I don't know yet, Elena admits, watching the display in front of her, willing it to reveal something, anything, that might explain the sudden and unexpected quiet. But I think something changed. I think they're considering something they weren't considering before. Considering what? Grace asks. Elena doesn't have an answer, not yet, and the not knowing feels like its own kind of exhausting weight, heavier somehow than the fear that came before it, because now there is a fragile thread of hope tangled into the uncertainty, and hope, she is quickly learning, is far harder to carry than simple dread ever was. By the 6th day, the silence has stretched long enough that even the most disciplined officials in the command room have begun to show visible signs of strain, dark circles beneath tired eyes, voices clipped short by exhaustion neither coffee nor adrenaline can fully mask anymore. Holt has taken to pacing the length of the room in slow, measured steps, occasionally pausing to study the still image of the alien vessel as if sheer focus alone might force it to reveal its intentions. If they're not going to attack, Price says during one of the increasingly tense briefings, and they're not going to continue the ultimatum, then what exactly are they doing up there? Maybe they're deciding whether we're worth talking to, Elena says quietly, and the words settle uncomfortably over the room, because deep down, everyone present understands that possibility might be closer to the truth than any of them are prepared to fully accept. Just as the tension in the room threatens to boil over entirely, with several officials openly pushing once more for immediate military escalation, given the uncertainty, a soft, insistent alert sounds from the primary communications terminal. Every head in the room turns at once, the sudden noise slicing through the exhausted silence like a blade. We have an incoming transmission, the lead analyst says, voice barely above a whisper, hands hovering uncertainly over the console. Source confirmed. It's coming from the ship. The room falls utterly silent, every single person present holding their breath as the first new message in 6 long, agonizing days begins to arrive, carrying with it an answer that will finally determine whether humanity's quiet, careful gamble has paid off, or whether it has cost them everything they were desperately trying to protect. The transmission takes almost a full minute to decode, each second stretching unbearably, as lines of translated text begin to assemble themselves on the main display. Elena leans forward, barely aware of Daniel doing the same beside her, both of them watching the words form letter by letter, as if willing them into existence faster might somehow change what they say. Finally the message settles, clear and complete, and a synthesized voice reads it aloud for the entire room to hear. To the species designated Earth, your response has been received and evaluated. The instruction issued upon our arrival was not, as you may have understood it, a final demand. It was the first stage of a standardized assessment protocol used whenever a species capable of organized civilization is discovered within range of Dominion territory. Your reaction to that instruction has been recorded and analyzed accordingly. Elena feels her breath catch in her throat. Around her, the room remains frozen, no one daring to move or speak as the message continues. Species that comply immediately and without question are classified as governable, but insufficiently developed for full integration into interstellar coexistence, as blind compliance under threat suggests an inability to reason independently when faced with authority. Species that respond with immediate hostility or attempted aggression are classified as unstable and are dealt with according to containment protocol. Your species did neither. Holt exhales slowly beside Elena, disbelief plain across his face. They tested us, he mutters, almost to himself. The entire ultimatum was never a genuine demand for surrender. It was a filter. The synthesized voice continues, steady and unwavering. Your response, transmitted using shared mathematical constants rather than spoken language, demonstrated an ability to recognize patterns of universal understanding beyond your own cultural framework. This is considered a foundational requirement for any species seeking eventual contact with the wider community of civilizations within Dominion influence. Your species is hereby reclassified from immediate threat assessment to provisional contact status. A murmur finally breaks out across the room. Disbelief and cautious relief tangled together in hushed, overlapping voices. Elena grips the edge of her desk, feeling lightheaded, as if the weight she has been carrying since the ship first appeared has suddenly, impossibly, begun to lift. Provisional contact status, Daniel repeats quietly, testing the words. That's not surrender. That's not conquest either. It's a door, Elena says softly, still staring at the message on the screen. They opened a door. Finch steps forward, her expression carefully controlled despite the obvious relief flickering behind her eyes. Analyst, is there more to the transmission? Yes, ma'am, comes the reply, and another block of text begins to assemble on the screen. A representative delegation will be dispatched to establish direct communication with designated representatives of your species. This delegation will arrive within your planet's current rotational cycle. We advise calm among your population, as further displays of panic or aggression may complicate the early stages of this process. The Vireth Dominion does not seek to destroy potential partners. We seek to determine which species are prepared to become one. The room falls silent again, this time not from fear, but from the sheer enormity of what has just been confirmed. Holt turns slowly to Elena, something almost like respect settling into his tired features. You were right, he says simply, about all of it. Elena shakes her head slightly, still trying to process the sudden shift from days of dread into something that feels dangerously close to hope. I had a theory. I didn't know for certain. I believed the pattern meant something more than fear. Sometimes, Finch says quietly, that's the only kind of certainty any of us get to work with. Within the hour, the news spreads across the planet, delivered carefully by governments, still cautious about triggering another wave of panic, but unable to contain the sheer scale of what has happened. Elena watches footage from cities around the world shift from images of empty streets and anxious crowds to something entirely different. People gathering cautiously outdoors again, looking up at a sky that no longer feels quite so threatening, some crying, some simply standing in stunned silence, trying to comprehend a future that looked entirely different only hours before. Grace calls again, her voice trembling, though this time with something closer to disbelief than fear. Elena, they're saying it's not an invasion anymore. They're saying we're going to actually talk to them. Is that true? Is that really true? It's true, Elena says, allowing herself, for the first time in days, a genuine smile. We're not surrendering, Grace. We answered them the right way. You did this, Grace says softly. Didn't you? Whatever happened, you were part of it. Elena doesn't answer directly, too aware of the confidentiality still surrounding much of what occurred inside the command room. But the silence on the line speaks clearly enough, and Grace doesn't push further, simply letting out a long, relieved breath instead. As the day continues, preparations begin for the arrival of the promised delegation, an event unlike anything humanity has ever attempted to organize. Elena finds herself pulled into meeting after meeting, her earlier theories, now treated as essential groundwork for understanding how communication with the Dominion might actually unfold. Scientists, linguists, and diplomats from dozens of nations converge on the research building, all working together with an urgency that feels less like fear now, and more like determined, focused hope. Late in the evening, as the building finally begins to quiet for the first time in days, Elena steps outside alone, needing a moment away from the noise and tension that has consumed every waking hour since the ship first appeared. The night air feels strangely calm, stars scattered across a clear sky, the same sky that has held humanity's greatest fear and, now, its most fragile hope. Daniel joins her a few minutes later, holding 2 cups of coffee, offering one to her without a word. They stand together in silence for a while, watching the sky, both of them still processing the sheer scale of everything that has happened. Do you think they're watching us right now? Daniel finally asks, deciding what kind of species we really are. Elena considers the question carefully before answering. I think they've been watching us for a long time already. I think this was never really about deciding whether to conquer us. I think it was about deciding whether we were ready to be part of something bigger than ourselves. And are we? Daniel asks quietly. Elena looks up at the sky, thinking of the fear that gripped entire cities only days ago, the arguments in the command room, the fragile, careful decision that could have gone so differently if even one detail had been misunderstood. I don't know yet, she admits. But I think we finally have the chance to find out. Above them, unseen, but no longer entirely unknown, the vessel continues to hold its position, patient as ever, no longer a symbol of impending destruction, but something far more complicated, an open question, stretching out toward an uncertain, unwritten future. The delegation arrives exactly as promised, descending in a small, sleek craft that lands without sound or disturbance on a secured stretch of land, chosen specifically for the occasion, far enough from major cities to limit panic, close enough to allow the world's leaders to gather quickly. Elena stands near the front of the assembled crowd, heart pounding, as the craft's outer surface shifts and folds away, revealing a doorway where none seemed to exist only seconds before. 3 figures emerge, tall and composed, their forms humanoid, but unmistakably foreign, movements precise, in a way that feels neither mechanical nor entirely organic, something carefully balanced between the two. The lead figure introduces itself simply as Voss, and for a strange, disorienting moment, Elena wonders if the shared sound of the name is coincidence or something else entirely, though she never finds the courage to ask. The days that follow blur together in a whirlwind of careful, deliberate diplomacy. Elena is asked to remain closely involved, her early analysis of the coordinate sequence having proven crucial enough that both her own government and the Dominion representatives specifically request her continued presence during the earliest negotiations. She sits in rooms filled with translators, scientists, and officials from nations that, only a week earlier, seemed more likely to turn against each other than work together, all now bound by the shared, sobering understanding that their old rivalries mean very little when measured against the scale of what waits beyond their own sky. The Dominion representatives explain, patiently and without judgment, the broader structure of the assessment they call First Threshold Evaluation, a process applied consistently to every civilization discovered approaching a certain level of technological development. Species classified as governable but underdeveloped are left largely undisturbed, monitored quietly, until deemed ready for reassessment. Species classified as unstable are contained, their ability to expand beyond their home system carefully restricted, until such time, if ever, that stability can be reasonably confirmed. Only species capable of demonstrating independent reasoning under pressure, without collapsing into either blind obedience or unchecked aggression, are offered the opportunity Earth has now been given: provisional contact, a slow, structured introduction into a much larger community of civilizations spread across a portion of the galaxy, far vaster than anything humanity previously dared imagine. You must understand, the representative named Voss explains during one of the early sessions, its voice calm and measured. The initial demand was never expected to be obeyed without resistance. A species that simply surrenders authority the moment it is threatened demonstrates a dangerous willingness to be controlled by any force strong enough to intimidate it. Such a species, if left unchecked, becomes vulnerable to far greater dangers than our own evaluation process. And a species that responds with violence, Elena asks, demonstrates an inability to recognize when conflict cannot be won. Voss replies simply. Such a response, left unchecked, often leads to conflict beyond the boundaries of a single world, conflict that becomes difficult to contain once it begins. Elena considers this carefully. So you needed proof we could recognize a third option, something between total submission and open conflict. Precisely, Voss says. Your response, using constants shared across all forms of advanced reasoning, proved exactly that. It demonstrated patience, precision, and an unwillingness to be governed purely by fear, three qualities essential to any civilization capable of eventually joining a wider community without becoming either a burden or a danger to it. As the negotiations continue, the wider world slowly begins adjusting to its strange new reality. Elena watches, sometimes from within the command room, sometimes from footage broadcast across every screen on the planet, as humanity takes its first uncertain steps towards something it has never truly prepared for: contact with a civilization far older and far more advanced than anything it has ever known. Grace visits during a rare break in the ongoing talks, standing nervously in the lobby of the research building, until Elena finally emerges, exhausted but steady. The two sisters embrace tightly, neither speaking for a long moment. I still can't believe it, Grace finally says, pulling back slightly. A week ago I thought the world was ending. Now they're saying we might actually get to learn things from them. Technology, medicine, things that could change everything. It's not going to be simple, Elena warns gently. This isn't a fairy tale ending. There's still so much we don't understand about them, about what they expect from us moving forward. But it's not the ending we feared either. Because of you, Grace says quietly. Because of a lot of people, Elena corrects, though she allows herself, finally, a small measure of quiet pride in what she helped accomplish. But yes, I suppose I played my part. In the weeks that follow, formal structures begin taking shape. An international council established specifically to manage ongoing communication with the Dominion. Careful protocols developed to ensure no single nation gains disproportionate advantage from the new relationship, and slow, cautious agreements formed around the exchange of information deemed appropriate for a civilization still considered, in the Dominion's own words, in an early stage of development. Elena finds herself permanently reassigned, no longer simply an astrophysicist buried in research data, but a key figure in humanity's newly formed diplomatic effort, tasked with helping bridge the vast gap of understanding between two civilizations that, until recently, had no idea the other even existed. It is not a role she ever imagined for herself, and some nights, lying awake long after the day's negotiations have ended, she still finds it difficult to believe this has become her life. One evening, several months after the initial contact, Elena stands once again outside the research building, the same spot where she and Daniel once watched the night sky together, in stunned, exhausted silence. The world around her has changed in ways both visible and quiet, cities slowly returning to a version of normal life, though an undeniable awareness now colors everything, the understanding that humanity is no longer alone, no longer the only story unfolding beneath its own sky. Daniel joins her, as he often does now, the two of them having grown close through the shared intensity of everything they experienced together during those first uncertain days. Council wants you to lead the next round of technical exchange discussions, he says, handing her a cup of coffee. They think you're the best person to help interpret what the Dominion scientists are offering. Elena accepts the coffee, glancing up at the stars scattered across the clear night sky, no longer entirely unknown, no longer entirely safe, but no longer purely a source of fear either. It feels strange, she admits. A few months ago, I thought I might be helping decide whether humanity survives the week. Now, I'm helping decide what we do with an entirely different future. Does that scare you? Daniel asks. Elena considers the question honestly, turning it over the way she once turned over rows of unexplained numbers hidden beneath a warning, meant to bring the world to its knees. A little, she admits, but I think that's all right. I think a little fear keeps you careful. It's blind fear that gets people into trouble. Careful fear, the kind that makes you pay attention, that's the kind that helped us get here in the first place. Above them, the sky stretches out in quiet, endless patience, filled now with the knowledge of countless other stories humanity has only just begun to glimpse. Other civilizations, other choices, other tests perhaps still waiting somewhere, in the vast, unexplored dark. Elena knows, standing there in the cool night air, that the events of the past few months were never truly an ending. They were simply the first, fragile step into a future far larger, and far more uncertain, than anything humanity had ever dared to imagine before. A future built not on surrender, and not on conflict, but on the quiet, deliberate choice to answer fear with understanding instead. And somewhere far beyond the edge of their own solar system, among countless other worlds still waiting to be discovered, that choice continues to ripple outward, carrying with it the quiet, unshakable proof that humanity, given the chance, chose curiosity over fear, and understanding over blind obedience, when it mattered most.